as a consolation, Shamash says to Gilgamesh, there is somebody who could maybe help you. And this is where the story really gets interesting, because he sends him to the far away to visit his great uncle, who's a guy named Zizidaru. And Zizidaru is in the Bible, Noah. This is a 900-year-old Noah in the Bible. Now, you have the Bible story of what the Great Flood was about. But what you're going to find in your books, in Gilgamesh 10, is the true story, according to the cuneiform tablets. What they knew about the flood, they knew when it was going to come, and one god, Enlil, said, let them all die, because they're too noisy and they're diluting our bloodline. He was very concerned about his bloodline. And the story of how we were saved with the ark and with the saving of humanity, because the flood wiped everything out. The only thing that saved them were those folks, and there weren't all those animals. You know, there was a movie just came out called Noah. I don't know how many saw Noah. Okay, that's a bunch of made-up Hollywood stuff. However, you will discover in your books, Gilgamesh 10, how life was preserved. It really happened. It wasn't all the animals. I'll reveal the secret of how they did it, but it's in the story. And it's like the scholars who wrote the Bible were reading the cuneiform tablets. There were libraries of cuneiform tablets, and the kings had all this information. And they couldn't understand what was going on because they weren't technically as astute as we are. So they made up stories from the cuneiform tablet to cover the scene that they read about. And you'll see, when you read your story, you'll see what the real truth was about actually what I think happened. And we have the mothership. This is a depiction of the Anunnaki mothership. We know when we go someplace to civilize a planet, like when we went to the moon, we had a ship that went around the moon and sent a transporter down, the Eagle. Eagle landed from the mothership, which orbited the moon before they got off the moon, came back to the mothership. So the concept of mothership has been around for a long time. We have a space station today that orbits the Earth 200 miles above us. It's been built and made to accommodate 10 to 12 people now. But one day, we will emulate the Anunnaki, I believe, and we will create this huge, monstrous mothership, which was a supply station for the Anunnaki on the planet Earth. Realize that at the end of the flood, which was maybe 11,000 years ago, the Earth was covered with this 10 miles of mud. There was no way those that did survive the flood would have survived without help. They couldn't farm, they had no animals, they had no trees, there was no way to live. The Anunnaki took from the mothership trees, animals, and wheat, domesticated wheat, brought it down and helped those survivors to start civilization all over again. And that's the only way it could have happened, folks. In other words, the fish in the sea survived the scene, but the Earth was covered by a 1,000-foot tsunami, which you read in the story of how that happened, covered the Earth with mud. And those that did survive had to have help. And help came from the mothership. And in our story, the opening scene takes place in the mothership, so you get a little flavor of that. Okay, so the cast of characters and the locations of Gilgamesh 10 are supported by actual facts. For instance, there was a great flood. We know that. The Ishtar statue validates that there was an Anunnaki flying princess. The SUBMARINE kings list records that there was a king Gilgamesh. These are all true facts. There's a landing platform at Baalbek, Lebanon. We know that. It's, Hezbollah is using it as a defense base right now. And we found the remains of Ishtar's temple. Nebuchadnezzar recreated the gates of Ishtar's temple. So there were these facts that sort of support this interesting story. Now, ancient cylinder seals and carvings display Enkidu and the Anunnaki leaders. Now, we have beautiful cylinder seals, which were small hematite stones. Hematite is as hard as steel. They're about an inch tall, and they were polished in a cylinder, then carved in the negative around the outside were these pictures. And when you rolled it on clay, you got this image, positive image of what they look like. We've never before had pictures of what ancient people look like, but they are on the cylinder seals, so there's proof. And the temple beam carving depicts the whirlwind, the shuttle, the ark, and the whirlwind. Slide, please. Okay. Here's the submarine over here. This is what the ark was. The story you'll see that a ship floating on top of the water would never survive a 1,000-foot tsunami. It had to be some submersible that would tumble. If you notice, the depiction of this submarine has a snorkel on the top of it. That's how they breathe. So there's a validity to the story of how the Noah story really happened. Of course, the folks that wrote the Bible just dealt with what they had, and they made the ark float on top with the animals in it. But you'll see this carved, these 4 carved images of both the Karnak temple and the Abydos temple. Okay. One thing that we know from the cuneiform tablets is that the people of Sumeria, the city of Uruk, described the Anunnaki as flesh and blood beings. They weren't gods. In fact, they addressed them as Lord and Princess. In other words, they hadn't elevated themselves to the level of being gods. 4,600 years ago, there were people living together with the Anunnaki. In fact, we lost a few folks. Sorry about that. Remember I described the fight of Enkidu and Gilgamesh conquering the monster Humbaba. Now this is a depiction, a cylinder seal depiction of what they thought Humbaba looked like. We thought Humbaba looked a lot stronger and more powerful. But here's the story. You know, they took from the Gilgamesh story and they made depictions of it because they thought it was a true story. Shamash, who was the commander of the landing platform, is pictured here in a stela. Now this is an interesting stela, which is a stone that somebody carved onto, telling a story. That here is Shamash, and he's a giant compared to the people. So we have the fact that there was a discrepancy in height between the Anunnaki and the people. And this is a depiction of Shamash. He was, in the Greeks, he was called Apollo. He had many names, but he was the golden sun god. And they depicted him flying around with wings. And Gilgamesh, in his encounter with Shamash, wanted immortality, and of course he didn't get it from him because he wasn't allowed to. In the 11th tablet, the Epic of Gilgamesh appears to us from antiquity. This tablet is the most famous tablet. It's the 11th tablet, and it tells this story that I've alluded to of what the Great Flood was according to the Sumerian cuneiform texts.